Hello, and thank you for your interest in this panel discussion on diversity and inclusion in the field of trade compliance. This event was recorded on July 29th, 2020, and it was sponsored by ICPA and OIT St. Louis.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kelly, for that great introduction. Today, we really wanted to give everyone a space and an opportunity to kind of share their perspective about trade compliance and how it applies to diversity and inclusion in light of the recent events that have been taking place across our nation and even around the world with protests, and just really kind of highlighting how important diversity, equity, and inclusion is, and really having the conversation about it in terms of trade compliance. So we have 5 panelists who will be speaking, and their names are Aisha, Hamad, Obo, Benita, and Patricia, and I will allow them to give a quick introduction of themselves, their roles, and we will get into the conversation afterwards. So we can start with Aisha.
Yes, hello everyone. A really pleasure to be here. I'm currently the licensed customs broker and export compliance officer for HD Supply here in Atlanta. I started my career 10 years ago forwarding. So just really a pleasure to be here and just participate in this conversation.
Thank you, Aisha. Hamad?
Hello, everyone. Excited to be here on the panel. I am the Trade Compliance Manager for Linde Engineering Americas here in Houston. Have worked in this field for over 24 years, 17 out of which have been in US and 8 back in India. And I am excited to be here and share some of my experiences. Thank you.
Awesome. Benita?
Hi, Benita Lee here, humbled to be a part of this conversation. Thank you for having me. I'm a Canadian, born and raised physically on US soil right now. I've been in the trade compliance field since 2007, and currently I am an independent international trade compliance professional advising companies in Canada and the US.
Thank you, Benita. Patricia.
Hi, everyone. I am Patricia Marseille. I am the Director of Trade Management over at the Walt Disney Company. I started off within international trade as a sophomore in college. So it was actually a fluke for me. It was me working in international marketing, hating it, telling my mentor that I hated it. And so my mentor switched me into trade compliance, and I've never left the field ever since. So that's my beginning.
Thank you. Obo?
Hello, everybody. Thank you all for having me on this panel. My name is Obo Osai, and I am an international trade attorney. I've been doing it for about a little over 15 years. This is my second career. Previously, I have an engineering background, and so I did that route before going back to law school and doing this. So I'm excited about the opportunity to to be on this panel, and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. So we will get into the questions. And Obo, I'll start with you. You talked a little bit about your background in trade compliance and how you were in law, still in law, which kind of led to what you're doing now. Could you please tell us, how has your background influenced your experiences in trade compliance?
Certainly. I have, like I mentioned before, I have an engineering background, and that seems to help especially when it comes to classifying mechanical, electrical type, and being able to have a conversation with those engineers and actually understand what they're talking about. So that actually helps. And so I would say that that's really been a big help for me.
Thank you. Would you like to speak to any cultural experiences that may also influence your background, or even just, I guess, growing up? When did you learn about trade compliance, from who, if those were things that influenced you getting into the field?
Okay, certainly. Actually, the way I got into trade compliance is quite interesting. I was a principal contract specialist at a chemical company, and the in-house counsel, the trade counsel, knew I was trying to get, after I got my law degree, I was trying to get into in-house counsel position. And so I saw a presentation by, the trade counsel for the company, and outside counsel. And I was really intrigued by the way she knew all these regs, and she was potting off regs without any notes. And I was really impressed by that. And so months later, I get a call on Friday. Anyway, from the in-house counsel. I missed that call, and then so anyway, she calls me back on Monday morning, and she says the trade counsel, the outside trade counsel, is looking to move from the law firm she was with to another law firm, and she's looking for an associate. Would I be interested? I said, yeah, sure. So she says, well, send me your resume. So I sent her my resume. This is a Monday morning, mind you. And about 15 or 20 minutes later, she calls me back. She says, well, she would like to meet with you for coffee at Starbucks, just down in 15 minutes. I'm like, I'm not dressed for an interview. I don't have the mindset for an interview. I think she could probably hear the panic in my voice. And so she says, okay, tell you what, I'll go with you, So we walked over to Starbucks, and the whole time my chest is pounding because, like I said, I haven't prepared. I didn't, I haven't done any research. I wasn't even looking for, specifically a job at the time because, so we got to Starbucks, and she interviewed me. She had to do it that day because she was traveling to DC the rest of the week, and she needed somebody right away. So needless to say, the following week when she had me meet with the other lawyers, I was more appropriately dressed and a little bit better prepared. So that's kind of how I segued into trade compliance.
Yeah, the short and skinny of it. Thank you. Lenita, would you mind answering the same question? How has your background influenced your experiences in trade compliance?
You're a tough act to follow, Obo. So I'm a first generation Asian Canadian female, and I wasn't expected to have a successful or fulfilling career. And I think what my grandparents and my parents hoped for was just for me to find a nice man, get married, and have multiple babies. So I totally went against all the stereotypes. I was terrible at math and accounting, and I had an interest in social studies and English. So I went into supply chain and logistics. I got moved into sales and distribution, and then I was groomed as a customs specialist after an audit for a company who also had US entities.
Okay, so do you think that experience of, I guess, kind of knowing what expectations were for you versus, what you really wanted and your passion, how did you kind of deal with that, like that experience and really accept who you are and what you wanted?
Sure. I guess I was raised by grandparents, and I saw as a, you know, as a grandchild, first generation, your grandparents come over from Hong Kong in their retirement to raise you, and you have this a thought, a belief kind of built into you that, you know, you need to communicate with your grandparents. They don't speak English, and you're in Canada, so you kind of have one foot in an English speaking culture and then one foot in the homeland or the home culture, and you're trying to navigate that. I would say that, you know, they had a huge impact on my belief that bridges need to be built in trade and international compliance, and that there needs to be more people who can work with other cultures, who enjoy learning about other cultures and have experienced it themselves in the field. So, and I just kind of got thrown in like everyone else by just pure virtue of being at a company at a time. It was 9/11 actually. 9/11 is what sparked my whole career in trade compliance. And I mean that I should probably elaborate. And I mean that in that I was working for a company.
I think, Benita, we might have lost her video.
I can still see her.
It looks like Jeanette is frozen there. Oh, I should elaborate on that, not leave it there. But at the time I was working for a company when 9/11 happened and all trade stopped at the border. I'm in Canada. So it became very important for companies to be able to navigate and negotiate trade issues and be trusted traders. So that's how I got into it in that regard.
Well, Benita, I had a question if I can ask you. If you got into trade around 9/11, do you think that that has affected our industry in any way? I mean, or what is your, that's a silly question because of course it has, but what are your thoughts on what has changed from 9/11 until now? Do you have any insight into any changes?
Absolutely. I mean, like coming from Canada as a Canadian, we realized at that moment that it's important to be collaborative with the other trade regulators, not just in your own country, but others, because, you know, when something like COVID happens or 9/11 happens, all trade can stop if you are not a trusted trader. So it had huge impact, and it's the whole reason why my specialty was driven into this way, like being a part of industry and then being driven in the trade compliance way. Great question. Thank you.
Well, if we can move to Hemant, can you tell us kind of what the trade compliance field looked like when you entered the field, and maybe the similar question is how has it changed?
I mean, I'll have to tell a little bit of my background because that will help answer this question. And to start with, I would say that I have asked this question to so many of my trade compliance buddies that how did they end up getting into trade compliance? And by far, the answer I have received is by accident. No one growing up thinks that, oh my God, I'm going to be a trade compliance specialist. I'm going to work for trade compliance. Or even when someone goes into law school, no one thinks that. I mean, very few do think if they have their business, home business of trade compliance. So I happen to uh, fall in the similar category. I came into trade compliance by accident. I started as an engineer, just graduated engineering, started working for a company, and this particular person that was working in compliance actually resigned. So I, being the fresh engineer, they put me there, and then they said, okay, continue doing what you are, in addition also do trade compliance. And over a period of time, from one job to another, from one country to another, I have switched from this technical job to a totally 100% commercial job, totally. And I'm loving it. I mean, the change has been definitely for good. So definitely my background helps me with what I'm doing today. Having worked in India for 8 years, and then coming in here, having worked with various customs regimes of different countries, helped me with my current job too. As far as how has the compliance field changed, when I started working in India, predominantly the trade compliance field was a men's field. I didn't see women working there. There was not an issue. I mean, geographically, yes, there were people from different states in India. Nobody, I guess, internationally goes and work there. Now things have changed, but at that time. But when I came to States, I saw that as far as the gender diversity is concerned, the gender diversity definitely is very good in trade compliance. I do attend the Houston Brokers Association's lunch and learn meetings, and I'm amazed to see that 75% of the attendees are women, which is great. And things have changed for good over a period of time. I would definitely say that as compared to when I started my career 24 years ago to now, there has been a very positive and encouraging change in the field of diversity, inclusion, and rest of the things. Thank you.
You, Hamad. Patricia, same concept here. So what did the field look like when you started in terms of diversity, and have we made progress?
Yeah, so I guess first thing that I'll say is if it gets super dark around here, it's because we're about to have a pretty big storm. So the lighting keeps changing. But when it came to when I started in my career, it was very much a male dominated, just like Hamad acknowledged, very much a male dominated field, specifically white male dominated. And the transition in that space was interesting in navigating, especially since me being in there, a lot of the, so let me say there were three factors in it. It was male, it was white male, and it was very much older white male. So everything about what encompassed that group were older. So with me coming in, it was more like, why are you here, right? So a lot of it was in that type of thought as to, you're so young, why are you even interested in this? Like, we don't get it. A lot of the conversations, even with my curiosity about trade compliance, it was pretty much like, why do you want to know what's going on in other countries so much? Maybe you should just focus on the US. And it was just kind of like, no, I want to know it all. So that was really interesting. Watching the transition into now, it is a lot more women within the space, but I think the thing that I'm still disappointed about is the lack of diversity in the space when it comes to having more people of color within that space and younger within this space. I feel like when it comes to the current field, it's either like how I started, it's an intern, super young specialist, kind of role for a younger expert coming into that space versus really the community truly grooming them to be in a higher level or in a higher space, which is a disservice to the field. So that's what I see. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? Is
Yes.
it any better? Okay, perfect. I also have a storm that just passed in St. Louis, and it looks like it could be starting again. So I'm sorry if my audio or video disconnects. Can we have Aisha? Can you share some of what you think in terms of how the field looked when you started with diversity, and has it changed since you've been working in trade compliance?
Yeah, so I think outlier, right? Every time I speak to someone, they kind of, happenstance into this industry, but I actually chased after it. And that may have something to do with, exposure to international travel. While I was younger, my father is from Nigeria. My mother is from rural Alabama. And so with my father being a pilot in Nigeria, it was just conversations about transportation. And while I was in college and I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do, I really wanted to be a history teacher, but I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with Nigerian dads, that he wanted me to have something that was a little bit more stable, because during that time, 2008, it was kind of bad for teachers being furloughed. He just wanted me to have stability. So he just, recommended that I look into transportation. And so I did that. I transferred from Georgia State University to Clayton State because they were the only university in Georgia that had that degree at the time. And then just the exposure to one of my classes, it was just a snippet, just a little bit of information on customs brokerage. And I just started doing research and applied to different jobs in freight forwarding and customs brokerage. And then with that being said, I've only been doing it for 10 years, but there has been some change that I've seen as far as diversity. More so to the fact that in customs brokerage and freight forwarding, I would see more so logistics positions, supply chain positions dominated by males, and then the trade compliance, customs brokerage dominated by women. And it was a little bit more diverse on the customs brokerage side as far as race and gender. I moved over to the BCO side, or the importer exporter side, corporate, right? It was less of that diversity on that end. And I mean, it's something that I try to tell people about all the time, because I think people just don't know too much about this industry, right? I think people are starting to learn about it now with China tariffs. Like, nobody really knew what I did, but things coming out into the news, people are really starting to understand, what trade compliance is. And I've always been the type of person to talk to younger people in my community, just about other opportunities that are out there. It's not just a doctor or a lawyer, but there's other things where you can make a really great living and doing something that you would possibly love. So
I agree. There definitely needs to be a community that advocates, for the field, because a lot of times it is just something that you find out about, like you were saying, maybe in one of the like weeks in your class syllabus, you talk about it for a little bit. So excellent. Thank you for your answer on that. We're going to move over to the next question, and I will start with Benita. So do you think our field, as it is now, is more or less diverse than other fields?
I don't have the numbers, but because of our interaction with partners and counterparties and other nations, you would think that there's more diversity in the people we interact with. In terms of our field, I would say that you see the same in our field versus others, my gut feel is that higher leadership positions, we see the majority of CEOs and leaders, VPs, compliance officers. I would say there's been an uptick, but there's still work to be done. I came in as like an Asian token, and now there's like a few other Asians as well, or females, right? I think the numbers game is just like the the equality that we see across other industries.
Yeah. As you were saying, it can be kind of hard to gauge, without statistics. However, from I guess a qualitative train of thought, yes, it is great when you get to see, more people who you are able to relate to, and just really be able to watch that diversity piece blossom. So I will pose the same question. Do you feel that our field is more or less diverse, to Hamad?
And before I answer that question, I'd like to add to little what Aisha mentioned, and that's about getting added the diverse field and education. I'm a part of the advisory board member for the Houston Community College. I do interact with them, attend their meetings, and I have seen that typically for the business class, for the 2-year business class for community college, there are, I would say, at least 60% international students. And I have interacted with them, and I have seen that those international students have tremendous interest in the field of trade compliance. So if people like us or people attending this meeting do take efforts and reach out to the people who need little guidance. I mean, what I offer is a very little time of mine, but that's a lot for these people, and that would bring more and more diversity to the field. And with diversity, it helps, because diversity brings the good in everybody. So having said that, I would go to your question of whether the field is more diverse or not. The answer to that is it depends. I mean, if I compare our trade compliance industry with the high-tech industry, I would say that the high-tech industry is much more diverse than us. We are diverse too, but the high-tech industry is much diverse than us. If I go by location, just within trade compliance industry, if you happen to talk to or know people in the trade compliance field in bigger cities like LA, New York, Houston, maybe Atlanta, you would find a much diverse group, rather than if you happen to talk to a smaller town thing, because I talk to a lot of brokers that have their remote offices in smaller towns. Over there, you would find like more of the people that Patricia mentioned, that okay, the group is less diverse there. So I would say that definitely our group is diverse depending on either what the location is, and also with what industry are we comparing. If we are comparing with engineering industry, if we are comparing with mechanical industry, definitely the trade compliance group is more diverse. But if we compare with the high tech industry, definitely there is a long way to go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, Patricia, please respond.
It's okay. If it's okay, I'd like to add to that, because with everything that we're speaking about here, I love Hamad's answer of it depends, because with what Aisha identified, pretty much with what everyone identified, is the diversity of the buckets, is how I would put it. Because if you're looking at trade compliance in the history of brokerage and in the history of broker management, there is a ton of diversity in that space on all accounts. Like we're talking ethnicity, we're talking age, like tons of diversity. But if you take it and you throw it in a corporate space, and since I've grown up in the corporate space from the time, you know, that I started as an intern to where I am in my position now, I would say it's very slow to make its progression in the right direction. Very slow. And that is something that I'm looking to be a part of, seeing the change, being a part of the change that I want to see. Because that portion of it, it doesn't look anything like the brokerage side. It doesn't look anything like the mom and pops, and even the mom and pops, from what I've seen, is not as diverse either. But I would say for sure the corporate arena has a lot of work to do when it comes to that diversity. Just wanted to add that.
Great. Well,
Yeah.
oh, not great. Well,
Okay.
Patricia, I wanted to follow up on that because, I mean, the question is then, you know, what can we do? I mean, just leads the next question, and what you were talking about is, you know, how do we help these young people? How can we support young, and to you, Hamad, as well, how can we support young people of color into letting them know what an awesome career this is? What can we do?
I think a lot of it comes down to simple exposure.
Yep.
I know for myself, trade compliance wasn't something I ever even heard of. And if it wasn't for what happened to me as an intern and me just simply being dissatisfied and having a mentor switch me into that space because I wanted more of an international exposure, I was originally going into law. That's really what I was studying originally. It was corporate law. And once I got exposed into trade compliance, I was hooked. Like, it was like, this is the best of both worlds. Who needs the legal front? Let's just do this. So I think it's really just a matter of giving our youth exposure. And it starts from, I mean, honestly, if it started in college, if it even started in high school, there are programs like Inroads. Inroads is a program that actually goes after African-American, Black teenagers from high school and college and places them in corporate internships specifically, nothing less than that. And what they do in that program is they actually groom these teenagers. They give them courses on corporate etiquette, professional etiquette. They tell them how to dress professionally, what engagement is like, how to manage conflict when it comes to conversations with your leaders. They give them a mentor and a sponsor when they are giving an internship. So they set them up for success all the way through. And you can be a part of this Inroads program from the time in which you are in high school, all throughout college. And if you are looking to get a different internship in a different company, due to their connections with various companies, they will assist you in getting into a different company. So you can start 1 year with Procter & Gamble, and then the next year end up in, you know, whatever, AT&T, right? So it is about setting up the spaces so that, one, they have the exposure, but two, you provide them with the resources to actually help them through the process so that they can ask the questions that are uncomfortable, but not necessarily going to be answered from their direct report as an intern, but they can get that answer from a mentor. They can get that answer from a sponsor. So it's really just thinking about the process for the individual differently and looking at it more of what would help me if I knew nothing about this space. I open it up to everyone else.
Yeah,
Oh,
I
Hema, you have a mentoring program. Sorry.
Yeah, and I can add to that. It's rightly said that you need mm, to reach out to the people and give them an exposure. A lot of the communities, colleges need help. They need people like us who work in the corporate to go and mentor the people. There are so many compliance groups. Like I know ICPA gives scholarships every year to college students. There's an export council in Houston that actually gives scholarships. They reach out to the companies actually to find out if the companies have, and this is just in the field of trade compliance. They reach out to the companies to find out if there are any summer internships available. Then they match that with the local Houston Community College kids, and then they get all the applications, they sort out, and they promote these activities. So I would say that definitely reaching out to the kids, reaching out via the organizations, spending little bit of our more time and giving them the exposure, the information that can be given, supporting them with internship. A lot of companies have internship. These kids would say that, okay, if I don't get money, that's fine. But if I get the name of your company on my resume saying that, okay, I worked for 3 months in this multinational company, that helps me to get the job. So providing those smaller internship like that definitely goes a long way.
And internships are just a very important part of this industry, I think,
Absolutely.
because it's very specific to a particular, it's a very niche field. So internships are, I think, are more important than other fields.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. Because a lot of times it is the internship where a person is first learning about trade compliance. Aisha, I wanted to hear a little bit about what you think we can do to also increase exposure.
Yeah, so I think starting with conversations like these, right? Coming up with ideas from different people, but then also that we're not just having these conversations and talking about diversity, but actually bringing diversity to other trade compliance panels and conferences, right? To make sure that those things are diverse, and it's not just diversity and inclusion where we're, having diverse people speaking at. And then also another thing could be to pass the torch, right? So if you frequently get asked to speak at certain conferences, maybe give somebody else or recommend somebody else an opportunity to speak to give them exposure. And then that also brings a diverse crowd to as far as the attendees as well, right? And then I would say I agree with Patricia, just the mentoring, right? I had an awesome mentor. I started in imports, and she told me about exports. Like, like you learn imports, exports is so much easier. Just, giving me that extra encouragement that I could do it. And that pushed me to learn imports as well as exports, which you don't see a lot of people do, right? They're either all imports or all exports. So just maybe a little bit of both. But I think that helped me in my career, and as far as where I am. And then also being able to pass that exposure on to people in my community. And it doesn't have to be college, right? It could just be anybody you're around, church or family members or anything like that. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Benita, did you get a chance to answer yet? I'm sorry, my connection is.
Oh, no, that's fine. Yeah, and I wanted to jump in there and agree with everybody about the mentor. I mean, that was huge when it came to and internships. I mean, the way that I got into it specifically was I went on I took international business in university. I went on on my first international assignment to Malaysia for my internship, national business. And then when I came back to work, I was put in the trade compliance, the customs compliance to be specific, role to be mentored by the customs specialist at the specific company. And that had a huge bearing, the internship, the mentorship that I had from Ron. I mean, many of his colleagues from the US and Canada had said to me, you don't know how lucky you are to be mentored by this one person. So I got very specific and customized training from one person that was kind of like a dinosaur in the field, had been in the field for 30 something years. And so I'm very grateful. And I think since all this COVID stuff started happening and the Black Lives Matter and everything else, I've really put myself out there and said, and mostly like on LinkedIn, but also on other social media, that I'm willing to be a mentor for people that are in early stages business, not necessarily trade compliance, but you can bet that a lot of young people and very diverse groups are interested in trade compliance now. With like COVID and the supply chain disruptions, the
Tariffs.
yeah, exactly.
Amazing. Yeah, that is great, and good to know that you are a mentor who's available for people interested to learn more. We will be sure to leave the LinkedIn pages of all the panelists who are attending this event. They have a wide range of knowledge, and I'm sure we could all benefit from learning more about you guys and even connecting. Oppo, I would like to ask you about the diversity in the law field, and do you think that specifically law with trade compliance is more or less diverse than other fields?
Difficult to say because
It depends, right?
there's not a lot of. I haven't run across. Let me say it that way. I haven't run a lot of across a lot of people of color or different ethnic backgrounds, you know, in the trade compliance and law. I mean, there are some, but not a lot. But I also want to speak to what I believe Hamad mentioned about, you know, plugging into some of the like community colleges and schools and having a program at SM. I remember at SMU they have a program with some of the trade attorneys, or at least, you know, international law attorneys, where, you know, we're supposed to you know, they pair us up, you know, with each, you know, law student to be able to be a mentor basically for such, you know, maybe, you know, going out once a month to lunch and just being a mentor, and then if there's opportunities for internships or or some kind of summer internships, then, you know, you'll bring it to their attention. And you know, I think that program has been, you know, at least has been successful, but, you know, with COVID, you know, it kind of put everything, you know, sort of on hold, as far as, you know, having those interactions. So, you know, so, but as far as we could definitely use more, you know, diversity in the law. It's specifically trade law. And there's a lot of ladies that I've met in trade law, which is a great thing, and I've learned a lot. Matter of fact, my mentor, at least the partner that I learned from, and has been she's probably been practicing 30 years international trade law now. So I worked for her for about 7 years before I moved on. It was a great opportunity to learn, and so we should make ourselves available to also be mentors, just like Benita is doing, and whether it be through community colleges or you basically start the pipeline early. If I'm not mistaken, intellectual property has programs in intellectual property law, so maybe we can mimic some of those type of programs that they have. And then I think there was one that Patricia mentioned, and maybe mimicking some of those, in the trade space would be great.
Yeah, like inroads. I agree.
Correct.
So we are closing up the part of the events where we're asking the questions that we had for the panelists. Before we switch over to Q&A, I wanted to give anyone on the panel the opportunity to just kind of sum up how they feel, where we are, where we're headed, what do you want to see, just like a minute or two to kind of, share your thoughts. We will start with Aisha, and then feel free to join in the conversation, guys.
Sure. So what I am is I'm hopeful. I feel as though that, just us having these discussions and opening up the dialogue for everyone to participate is a great start. And I think all of our panelists have provided great recommendations on how we can continue to provide exposure and support to people that could be possibly looking into the field or that don't know about the field, at all. So I think we have work to do in all aspects in our country. But what I'm very hopeful, and I'm grateful to be where I am and to be where we are as a whole, as a country. So.
Thank you.
So I think for me, I think we also need to think differently about how we go about creating some of these roles for trade management, because the history of it has been, and I see one of the questions actually relates back to this, but the history has been totally import focused, totally export focused. And so you have a lot of roles now that are trying to figure out how do they switch in, how do they learn, how do they merge. And it's really, we have to redesign the roles to be more open to having both hands in the pot, right? Having exposure to export compliance and import compliance and being able to merge the two. I think the other mistake that we've made historically has been, if you are in the commercial space, especially for export compliance, if you are in the commercial space, then only worry about the commercial space classifications and requirements and license restrictions, only to have people surprised that they had defense requirements that were placed on top of some of their export, right? So it's making sure that you have some exposure to both spaces and placing yourself in forums or in trade groups like ICPA and SIA to really just give you exposure to more than just the subject that you may be managing today. Allow that exposure to to give you greater curiosity that will provide you a greater opening into the world of trade.
And that's well said, Patricia. Thank you. So I would say that as responsible practitioners of trade compliance, first, each one of us has to look around and see where we work or in which in whatever environment we work with, is there a problem with diversity? And if there is one, then we need to understand it and accept it as a problem. I would say recognizing the problem and accepting it to be a problem is like half battle won, because a lot of times we have an issue in deciding whether it's a problem. And cautious efforts needs to be done for making the group diverse and seeking the benefit of it. And just making the group diverse for the sake of it, or for looking cool, is not the criteria. There are so many advantages of making the group diverse. And I would say conducting events like what we are doing today and conducting fair discussion on this sensitive topic of diversity and inclusion is an example of significant progress that has been made, and it is really great. We have definitely made progress, and I think we should, there's still a lot of scope of improvement. Thank you.
Benita or Obo, please feel free to provide any closing comments.
Ladies first.
Oh, thanks for putting me on the spot there, Obo. I don't have much. I totally agree with all of you, the entire panel. For myself, I'm really, learning to listen, learn, and just having conversations like this that are open and inclusive, like are the key. I mean, the education and awareness part. I've basically taken that on for myself, like put my own program together. So I'd be looking for, my question to everybody else is like, what are some books that I can read by maybe some Black voices that you recommend?
Absolutely, that was my question too. What documentation, what can I do to be a better ally? What can I read? That kind of thing. We can collect a whole list of documents from the group, probably. If anyone has any suggestions, throw them in the chat box, and we can gather this list of resources for everyone. Excellent suggestion.
So I'll jump back in regards to allyship, where a lot of what we were talking about is really by starting in a place of providing people exposure into this space and into the subject of trade compliance. But I think the other portion of it, in addition to that exposure, is understanding that because we've worked in this space, we have a very strong, solid foundation and understanding of what it took to be here, right? And what it takes to actually manage this space. And I think we take that for granted a lot of times when it comes to training someone else to be in this space. It's this kind of understanding of, if I give you this material, then you should be able to run with it. If I send you to a training class, then you should get it and you'd be all right and totally fine and you can move on with it. And if we're not providing the actual toolkits of truly managing the space, then our expectations aren't warranted. And here's what I mean by that. You bring a novice into this space, especially some, let's say a Black teenager, never had any exposure to trade compliance, never even left probably their town before, right? Never mind going to another state. And so now you're having this conversation with them of speaking about how this is what you need to understand. These are the things you need to do. And so we automatically think like, you know what I mean when we're talking about exports, it's, going out of country, like, but the tone of that reference and that comment is where we need to really start to replay that, right? Because it's the whole thing of understanding that you are dealing with novices. You are dealing with individuals who've never had this exposure before. So if you're going to speak about export compliance for the first time to someone, then understand it's the first time, right? And being able to provide the tools of really managing that space and understanding that space, and knowing that a lot of the givens of how the organization has run or how the department has run are things that need to be revisited or redesigned in regards to bringing a novice into that space. And we all do it, especially because, you know, it's human nature, right? You start to get something, you get used to it, you're totally done, you're passing it on to someone else, and you're like, look, the process is there, it's written, the templates are in there, just use it. And this person's looking at it like, this is Mandarin and I only know English, right? So yeah. So it's just, we have to in the allyship, we have to step in looking at it from those glasses and from that space, and being able to step in and talk, to speak for that person, on behalf of that person, in speaking to the novelty of what it is that they're, or where they're coming from. I think that in and of itself can be a huge help in just being able to speak up and let them know that you see them and that you understand it's brand new and is going to be a learning curve, and that you're there for the distance of the learning.
I think we wanted to pass it over to Obo for final comments, and then we'll get into the question and answer section.
Okay, thank you. I agree with all that's been said, and all I also would like to add is, I remember when I first came into the field, there's a lot of acronyms that people throw out, and they just assume what those acronyms mean. So this goes along with what Patricia was just sharing, is just we need to remember that heck, even sometimes when you're dealing with not even folks in trade, but other people in other departments, and you start throwing out acronyms and they're looking at you with glassy eyes. So got to remember that, just to explain and what these acronyms mean, or if you're dealing with whether it be somebody in another department or whether it be somebody who's totally new to the field, and just kind of walk them through, like Patricia was just saying. So so that's I don't have much more to share than what's already been shared.
I think what we had, the conversation we had today with you guys has been very, very useful for me as well, with learning just about, where we are, where we want to go, how we're going to get there. Kelly, let's turn it over to the comments to ask a few questions that we have, and I'll let you field those questions. And guys, feel free to answer as you kind of hear it and you want to chime in.
Yeah. Well, a little bit of the conversation in the chat box has been about essentially cross-training between imports and exports, which we touched on a little bit already. So this kind of leads to the question of, how do you mentor someone who's maybe mid-career? How do you mentor someone that maybe wants to increase their stature, right? So we're talking about that there might be diversity at the lower levels of our field, but maybe we don't see that diversity in the leadership. So how do we get mid-career people of color into leadership positions? How can we do that? Does anyone have any comments about suggestions on how we can promote those mid-career professionals or cross-train them on different things?
I would say that people it all depends on how many people start at the bottom. if more and more diverse people start at the bottom in this group, at some point of time, they are the ones who are going to be in the mid management level, and from them, few of them are going to go on the top. So I would actually start with involving more and more people on like on a freshman level. The first step is to add more diverse group to this field, and as the time passes, the things would settle for itself. Then we would see more of, and I agree with you that we don't see that diversity in the leadership position, at least in trade compliance field. But that will happen if more and more people, diverse people, start getting into this field right from the let go.
I think it's also for those who are Black humans out there who are mid-level and looking to rise up. It's ultimately speaking about trade compliance from a strategic space. So much of what we do and the history of what we've done has been more on the compliance and driving the compliance of the company and ensuring that there are safety measures in that space. But trade compliance isn't only compliance. It also is in helping facilitate business and doing it wisely. It's also cost management and doing it efficiently. So it's the strategy that you're able to drive in your conversations in the work space and the work products that you are able to deliver, and speaking to those things in every chance that you get in your connections with the business and with your leads. That in and of itself will drive an opening for a releveling of your role. Now, what I would say for allies is that if you are working with Black human partners who are not seeing that within their space, they are focused on compliance, they are driven by compliance, but they have spoken to you about the fact that they do want to get elevated, then it is helping them to see that and helping them to understand that there is a strategy section to what they do. And as long as they can find a way to make some collaborative efforts and engagements with the business to drive strategy and to be a part of that conversation, to be at the table for the strategy sessions, then it's so much easier from there to drive the conversation of elevation and promotion.
And the question that was posed was about, imports versus exports. Do any of you have an opinion on whether, does someone have to be strictly imports? Does someone have to be strictly exports? Can you build a career as kind of like knowledge of all trade compliance, or do you have to specialize? Is specialization a requirement in the trade compliance field?
So I would, it kind of depends on the company, right? Because some companies will be a little bit more export heavy, and then some would, specialize more in imports. But you definitely don't have to do one or the other, right? And that's kind of what I did. I started in imports, started in customs brokerage, but somebody exposed me to exports and explained to me that, it's an opportunity on this side as well. And then I took that information and I used that information to further educate myself in exports, right? And I think that's where you have to start. It's with the education piece, and then having conversations with other people that are on the opposite aisle as you, right? And then another thing that I do with the ICPA, I'm a part of the ICPA as well, and they have like the question and answer emails that come out. And so I'm constantly reading those, even try to test myself to see if I can answer them. And sometimes I may answer, right? And that kind of helps as well with exposure to either imports or exports as well. So.
And I would like to say that again, the answer is depends on the size of the company. When I started it here in US, I started with a mid-sized company. So I had the opportunity of doing imports, exports, logistics, all. I was wearing several hats. But if you like, for example, and Donita would agree with that. If you're working like company like Boeing, it's hard for you to work in exports and imports at the same time, because at the size of the company grows, they need people who are super specialized. So there is no one answer that fits that, whether you want to do imports, exports, or both. There are these opportunities available depending on the size of the company, and then you can either specialize in whichever field you would like, or if like I enjoyed when I was in that mid-sized company and I was wearing all the hats, so that was fun too, because 2 hours you do imports, 2 hours you do exports, and then you also call the shipping line and airlines and do logistics too. So it's again it depends answer.
Sure. We do have a question from the attendees. Can the panelists discuss adversity they've faced in the field and how they have dealt with it? Do any of you feel comfortable talking about adversity that you've faced as a person of color? It's something that maybe you can give advice for how to deal with negative feedback or negative situations.
Oh yeah, for sure. So I started off in the micro optoelectronics industry, and very male dominated space. So I actually remember a time in which I was being invited into a meeting because I was helping them solve a problem of being able to export some items, but also figure out how they can save money upon importing it into a country. We communicated back and forth several times via email, but this was the first time that we were going to meet face to face. And it was prior to putting a picture to your name, you know, online in regards to your contacts. So I walk into this room, we're having this meeting. I walk into this room, all males. No one speaks to me. No one says hello. No one even smiles at me. They kind of look at me walking in, and then they continue to have their conversations. I sit down, a couple of them look over, weird look, they keep having their conversation. Eventually one walks over to me and goes, "Excuse me, could you please get Patricia Marseille? We are waiting for her." That's interesting, I am Patricia Marseille. Everyone's face kind of froze, and then it was, "Well, do you really know why we're here?" It's like, really? Okay, you tell me why we're here then. Let's start from there. So it was really just kind of having that dialogue of, wow. Number one, there were several things at play, which I could see in all of their faces. There were several things at play. There was the fact that I am a Black human. There was that. Then there was the fact that I was young. That was the other piece of it. Right? So the conversation, it was, let's just say it got a lot rougher before it actually smoothed out. But for anyone who's dealing with such a impact, it really is understanding yourself and understanding the strength and the knowledge that you have and your purpose in that space. I knew why I was in that space. I knew they really couldn't walk away from the table without knowing the information that I had to provide them. So I just waited it out. I wasn't trying to prove myself. I wasn't trying to, you know, have them like me. At that point it was, I've got what you need. So we'll just, when you guys are ready, I'll deliver it. And that's pretty much how the conversation went. Eventually they warmed up to me, and they were the guys who were, you know, cheerleading me on throughout the business of, oh my gosh, talk to Patricia, she'll know. But those incidents, they happen. They happen too frequently than I care to say. But I remember that one specifically because it was my first time, and I was intimidated by it initially. And then it was just, this is awkward and weird and you guys are being weird, so I'll just wait it out. So that has been my experience with adversity.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else
One of the
wants
stories I heard was a young lawyer walked into a deposition and everyone just thought she was the assistant, so they asked her for coffee. Can you bring me the coffee? And I love her response. She had said, I am the attorney on the case, so when you find the coffee, I'd like some too. Like, you just have to be like, you have to have a prepared comeback for something like that. Because I know if it happened to me, I would be like, sure. Should I go get coffee? What, so I'm glad that we're talking about this, because then someone can have a response prepared and be prepared for something like that, to hold their ground and to get the respect that they deserve.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
No problem.
So another question was specifically for Benita about self-employment in trade compliance. So, can you talk a little bit about how that works for you and any struggles that you kind of faced in, going at it on your own, and what kind of adversity you might have seen in that kind of field?
Good question. The question was, Benita, how does one become self-employed as a trade compliance professional? So I can't speak for anyone else, but how I became a self-employed trade compliance professional was, I was living in Canada, and there was a commodity collapse. So a lot of people got furloughed, laid off in Canada. I know this is different in the US. In Canada, usually when you get laid off, you are given a package so that you can find a new job. And so basically how I became self-employed was I got laid off twice from different positions, and I took my package and I golfed a lot, and I started my own business. And my pitch for when I got to, it was kind of like an accelerator program. And so it was like a grant through the government. And what it was set up to do was help those that were impacted by the recession of 2016 and then and 2014 to kind of get back on their feet again. And my business idea was, hey, why don't I just do exactly what I've been doing for companies that need me, because they need a trade compliance when they get, or a trade compliance professional when they get audited or for certain roles, right? So I was like, why don't I just do exactly what I've been doing for the last 13 years and just consult back to those people that need it. It's what I've been trained to do. I love it. It's challenging. It's interesting. I learn something every day. It's always a new situation. So that is the story of how I became self-employed.
And that's what we like about this field, why we're all in it, because it never fails. Every day is different. You learn something new all the time. Great. Thank you. One of the comments in the group chat was whether anyone has run into a situation where they need to specifically show validation of having a broker's license, maybe discrimination based on that fact, asking for additional justification. It was a comment that, has anyone on this panel run into something like that?
I haven't had anyone actually ask to see my actual broker's license, but our conversations when I moved over, you know, to the corporate side from customs brokerage, where it was more so, you know, when I'm being introduced, it had to be that, you know, I am the licensed customs broker. So, you know, she knows what she's doing. She's qualified for it. And I mean, I don't see too much of an issue with that. Nobody has ever actually asked to see a brokerage license, though. So,
Or even heard of it.
right.
I mean, unless the only time I've heard that reference is upon hire. And that's usually a conversation between the candidate and HR, not as the hiring manager. I've never seen it or heard
And
it.
I think that maybe that's why it stood out to me a little bit more, because the introductions were more so based on, you know, me having my license, and introducing me in that way, instead of just, you know, this is Aisha, this is the trade, you know, the import-export officer for the company. But it was more so giving my requisites, you know, for the job. So I don't know.
And I'd just like to add one thing over here, that while we are talking about diversity and inclusion and definitely recognize the problems here, we want to do better than what we are here. But having come from outside US, I would still say that there are so many great things here, and a lot of people over here would have not had those opportunity to see the issues outside US, in comparison to diversity and inclusion. At least people have voices to raise here. There are sensible people who do understand that there is a problem, and definitely there is a path forward. But there are so many other countries in the world where even diversity and inclusion is not even discussed, or people are even not aware of something like this exists. So, I mean, on a positive note, there's so much that we enjoy here, and I would say that I appreciate that more coming from outside.
One last question that, you know, I personally had was, you know, is there anything that we can do to see more diversity on conference panels? You know, now we've been talking a lot about employment and making sure that we have people who are employed in our field, but you know, how can we give the people who are employed in our field a voice, and how can we make that voice as diverse as possible?
Yeah, I think I stated something about this earlier. A really good way to do that is, if you person that always speaks at conferences and seminars, reach out to someone that's you know, that's underrepresented, and give them the opportunity, recommend them for speaking engagement. I think that will make a huge difference as far as exposure and diversity on panels.
Great. Well, those are all the questions that we had in our chat box. So I think we can go ahead and wrap up for today's event. Thank you all to the panelists. Thank you so much for your candidness and your insight. We appreciate the views that you've been able to share today. Thank you, Danetta, for being our moderator. And we appreciate your time and preparation that it took to put this all together. Final note from me is the takeaway that I am taking from this event is I am going to start a hashtag called Open for Mentorship. And that is going to be on my LinkedIn. And I encourage you all to join me. And that way we can get the word out that we are willing to kind of share our insights with the next generation. So join me in LinkedIn, hashtag Open for Mentorship. Awesome. Well, with that, I will close today's session. Thank you so much. And we will be in touch, and I will send out a follow-up email to everyone, and we will be publishing the recording on LinkedIn. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you.
us.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure meeting all of you.
Same here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.